Welcome to the Active Listening Masterclass. Thank you so much for coming on this journey with me, and I am so excited for you to learn these techniques so you can start improving the way you listen, the way you interact, and the way you hear what others are saying. So part one of this masterclass, we are going to talk about the inner work that needs to be done in order to set yourself up for success. Now, this is a little bit of an unconventional approach, so bear with me for a few minutes here. Often, when we are having a conversation with others, what comes to mind? All of the inner chatter, the monkey mind, the inner dialogue that we're often talking to amongst ourselves while others are speaking to us. That looks a little bit different for everyone, but it's usually something along the lines of thinking of a response, thinking about your to-do list with maybe the 7,000 other things that come to mind instead of that conversation right now, and you can't believe the person's still talking. It's the running train of thoughts that we are hearing that distract us from the conversation that's being had. Now, although this is normal, this is an important distinction to make, because when you are a leader, when you are leading a team, when you are talking to team members or colleagues, it is important to hear and understand what they are saying. Because think about this. When is the last time you had a conversation with someone else and you could tell they weren't in it? Sure, they may have been standing there physically, they may have been nodding along, but you could tell their mind was elsewhere. How good does that feel? Not good at all. What if you are notoriously doing that to others? How effective of a leader do you think you are being if your team members, your colleagues feel like they're not being heard, especially if this is a pattern or a cycle that goes on? Okay? So it is very important to understand this fundamental concept that in order to have effective conversations, in order to listen to what others are saying, we need to have the mental and the emotional capacity to give them our attention and give them the time to listen and to engage accordingly. Okay? So in order to have that emotional and mental capacity to share with them, we need to create it within ourselves first. So what does that look like? Well, the very first step is understanding that when someone comes to you to have a conversation, they usually fall into one of two camps. They either want to be heard or they want to be helped. Think of a time when someone came to you and they were just venting and they just wanted to get something off their chest. If you gave them a suggestion in that moment, do you think they found that suggestion helpful, or did they just find it annoying? Did they come up with reasons why they didn't want that suggestion? Did they shut it down? Right? Because when someone enters a conversation with the intention that they just want to be heard, they just want to vent, they just want to talk through something, that is not a time to suggest recommendations. That is not a time to jump in with solutions, because there's too much of a mismatch there. Okay? On the other hand, the other camp is individuals who want to be helped, who come to you and start a conversation because they're looking for a solution, right? Individuals fundamentally have a different way of processing their thoughts. Some people really like to focus internally and think, weigh the pros and cons until they come to a solution. Other individuals need someone to talk to so that they can bounce ideas around, that they can verbalize their thoughts, hear it out loud, and process it that way. Other individuals are a little bit in between both camps. They don't quite know what they want. They don't quite know what they're thinking, and they need that guidance. They need someone to help them process their thoughts to get there. Now, this is important to understand, because when someone comes to you to be heard, it is important to give them that space to vent, to make them feel heard so that they are validated, they feel good, they're able to move on with the conversation. When someone comes to you to be helped, it is important to identify that they're looking for help so that you're able to guide them along appropriately. Once you start to identify what their type of thinking and thought process is, and whether they're looking for direct help and direct suggestions, or whether they're looking for indirect guidance, so that you can help them clarify their own thoughts, their own thought process, and come up to a conclusion that works for them. Okay? So fundamental difference, are they looking to be helped or are they looking to be heard? Okay? First thing to know. Second thing to start paying attention to is, what is your default style in a conversation? Now, what do I mean by this? When someone starts talking to you, what do you automatically start to think about? Okay? So over the next few days, while you're having conversations with others, I want you to start noticing. As you're having a conversation, stop and internally check in with yourself and think about, where is my head right now and what am I automatically jumping to? Okay, so there are 4 camps that people fall into. The first being solutions. So this looks like someone is talking to you, someone is telling you something, and without even considering whether they want to be helped or heard, you are just jumping in with solutions, with recommendations, with here's how to fix this. Okay? You are the fixer, you just want to get it done, move on, next. That's the first camp. The second camp is really the process person. Is someone coming to you and having a conversation and you are automatically thinking about what is the step-by-step that needs to be done here, right? So it's a little bit different than solutions. Solutions is more so, here's what needs to be done. The ultimate outcome versus process and step-by-step is, well, first you should do this and then you should do that and then maybe this should be next. And it's that step-by-step sort of logical approach to it. Now, the third camp is really reacting in an emotional or relational way. And that looks like focusing more on the emotional aspect of them and their story and the relationships within the conversation. So someone comes to you with a problem, rather than here's what you need to do or here's the steps you should take. The emotional camp looks more like, how are you feeling? How did this affect you? What did this person say? What's your relationship with that person looking like now? What is the impact of what happened between the parties involved? That's more relational. Now, the fourth camp. The fourth camp is, if you find yourself in it, please make note of it and start to shift into one of the other camps. The fourth camp is really judgment and criticism. And this is the camp where someone comes to you, they're telling you something, and it's just automatic judgment and criticism of what they did, what happened, what other parties did in the story. Okay, so this looks like, well, why would you do that? Oh, what were you thinking? Well, obviously that happened. And this is the least effective camp to be in. Because being on the other side of that conversation and hearing that judgment, hearing that criticism, especially if it's coming from your leader, it's not a fun place to be. And it's not a place that people will willingly keep coming back to. This is problematic because if you are a leader who falls into this judgment or criticism camp, what you are doing is really creating a pattern and a cycle of distrust and resentment between you and your team. Okay? So, just to recap, up to now, over the next few days, as you're having conversations, the 2 things you're going to start really paying attention to is, number 1, do you feel like this person wants to be helped or heard? And number 2, what is your default reaction? Are you falling into the camp of the solution? Are you falling into the camp of the process? Are you falling into the camp of the relationships? Or are you falling into criticism? Okay? Starting to identify this is really key, because the awareness of what your default reaction is gives you so much context and insight into how you are approaching conversations and where you need to shift to start becoming a better active listener. Now, fundamentally, when someone wants to be heard, the approach that you will take will differ. It will likely be a lot more emotional and relational. When someone wants to be helped, that's where you can fall into a little bit more of that process, or even a little bit of that task and solution-oriented camp. But until you have that fundamental understanding of this is what they want, and therefore this is the approach that I should take, conversations just won't go well from the get-go, and that's important. Number 2, something to start considering for yourself as you're doing the inner work is really taking note of anything that is a trigger for you. Now, a trigger doesn't have to be something that is a big emotional reaction. It doesn't have to be something that triggers you so extensively that you just cannot have the conversation anymore. No. Start identifying both the big triggers and the small triggers. What do you find annoying? What do you find frustrating? What types of things trigger you to want to roll your eyes or shut the conversation down or fall into that criticism camp because you think it's stupid, as an example? right? Those small triggers matter too. Because again, being on the other end of the conversation, especially if something starts to be a pattern with you as the leader, that's not a good thing. If you are falling into the pattern of being easily annoyed or easily frustrated, well, what you're telling your team members is that you don't want them coming to you with perhaps challenges or small issues that they're facing. Even if you're not saying that directly, your reaction is letting them know, hey, this leader, they're not a good person to come to when I'm struggling. And what's going to happen is they're going to hold off and let the struggle escalate until it's so big that they have no choice but to tell you. And dynamically speaking, that's not a good team dynamic to create. Instead, what you want to work on is starting to identify the triggers, again, big and small, so that you can develop awareness of them. It's once you have awareness of what your triggers are, that you can start noticing them in the moment. Once you're noticing your triggers in the moment, that's when you're really in a position to change. That's when you're in a position to really shift your mindset and start creating the emotional and mental space for other people to have that conversation with you. As an example, let's say every time your team member came to you with a question, you were physically annoyed. Even if you feel like it was just eternal, there's always signs of our annoyance unless we learn to be very good at mitigating it. So let's say you were annoyed, so as a result, you were very brief with your responses. Maybe your tone changed to be a little bit more rude. Maybe you were rolling your eyes and just showing signs of frustration, right? Once you have awareness of that, that's when you can start working on creating space for your team member to share that with you and for you to work through a solution so that it stops happening. Once you have created the space within yourself to hold that conversation with them, once you can enter the conversation, actually listen to what the problem is and help them process the problem and guide them through to a solution, that's when the issue will arise less frequently and maybe even be resolved entirely because you took the time to listen and act accordingly. But again, it starts with that internal space first to be able to hold space for others. Okay? So up to now, you are starting to identify whether people want to be helped or heard. You are identifying what your default line of thinking is in that conversation, whether you're jumping to solutions, processes, relationships, or criticism. And now you're also taking note of what your triggers are, big or small. What are the things that are frustrating you, annoying you, making you want to shut down from the conversation? Those are really important points to consider and fix. Okay, so when a trigger comes up, first of all, totally normal. Everybody has triggers. Everybody has triggers, but the difference here is you are going to learn how to handle your triggers. Okay? Depending on the trigger itself, there may be some internal work that needs to be done around your emotions, your beliefs, your mindset. If this is a trigger that is something from the past, such as a traumatic event, a very emotional event, something that's still lingering and causing trauma in the moment. Okay, I'm going to use the word trauma here very lightly, just to encompass anything that has happened in the past, but is still continuing to create a negative state and a negative emotional reaction in you. Okay, so this might look like something bigger. If there was a major fight that you're still holding resentment onto, if there was any sort of issue that hasn't been resolved and there's still tension, if someone mistreated you and now there's fear around new individuals mistreating you again, right? It could be larger trauma, or again, it could be smaller triggers that are still coming up. Is something annoying you repeatedly? It needs to be addressed. Is something frustrating you repeatedly? It needs to be addressed. Okay? So while you work on the internal mindset and beliefs of addressing that trigger, you're also going to work on addressing the trigger in the moment within the conversation. Now, here's what that looks like. Someone comes to you with a conversation, you feel the trigger activating you, and that may look like, number one, an emotional reaction, where perhaps you were calm, perhaps you were happy, you were in one emotional state, and now that you've had that trigger activated, you're in a different emotional state. You may be angry, frustrated, tense, you may feel, negativity come up, whatever the case, just recognize that it's happening. You may also have physical symptoms. anxiety, adrenaline, some shaking, some tension, any physical symptoms that accompany that emotional state, important to identify so you can address them. Okay? So you're in the conversation, you're being triggered, you're feeling your emotions activate, perhaps you're feeling some tension and tightness as well. Here's what you're going to do. Number one, you're just going to tell yourself and logically process this that you are triggered. In the moment, you are triggered. And now the reason I say this is because when you are doing the inner work and you are taking the time to identify what is triggering you and why, it becomes so much easier to logically separate that. If you know that you're being triggered in the moment by a colleague because 6 months ago you got in an argument with them and you're still holding on to that resentment, logically speaking, it becomes so much easier to recognize, hey, I'm triggered right now. I'm feeling frustrated that this person's talking to me. I know that it's because I'm still resentful of what happened previously. I know that I'm still holding on to a grudge, right? That logical thought process makes it so much easier to accept what is happening and to work with it in the midst of a conversation rather than trying to put that aside, not identify what's going on to you and just feeling the emotions. Because what happens when you're emotional? What happens when you're emotional in a conversation is you become reactive. Rather than being calm, being logical, and being engaged in the conversation, when you are reactive, you let your emotions take over. And that's when the conversation goes sideways. That's when people say the wrong thing. That's when they say something that they regret later on. Okay? And I don't want that for you. So you're in the conversation, you are being triggered, you've identified that you're being triggered, and you try to rationalize it for yourself of, okay, I understand that in the moment I'm being triggered. Okay? Next step, you're going to try to work through it if you can. And again, this is a practice, not perfection. This will take time. This will take multiple attempts. But it is completely worth doing and investing your time into because this will completely change how you approach conversations once you're able to handle this step. Okay? In the moment while you're triggered, you identify you're triggered, you now start to work through the trigger. That may look like taking deep breaths. If you are so triggered that you're unable to focus on the conversation, you feel yourself getting reactive, well, now you understand that and you can put a pin in the conversation, kindly ask to postpone it, depending on context, of course, this all differs, but this may look like something like, hey, unfortunately, now is not a good time for me. Can we return to this, tomorrow after lunch? Can we return to this in our next one-on-one meeting, right? Giving that context and reframing it so that you give yourself the space to come back to the conversation at a later time once you've been able to regulate yourself and calm down. Okay? But again, this will take practice and repetition. You will get to a point where you are starting to feel triggered. You'll be able to identify logically that this is what's happening. And then you'll be able to calm yourself and regulate your nervous system so that you are still able to logically put that aside and focus on the conversation at hand. Okay? That is the place that you want to get to. And again, it will take time and practice to work through your own emotions. But the more that you are able to process your internal state and your triggers on your own and work through them, the easier it becomes not to have that baggage in the conversations. When you are able to get to a place when you can have a conversation despite being triggered, that is when the nature of your conversations completely changes. Because then you are in a place where you can not only hold space for yourself as you work through the trigger, but you're holding space for the other individual, especially if they're triggered as well. And when you're able to hold that space, that is when the conversation will shift and get to a much better outcome. So while we're learning this, a very important thing I want you to know is that whenever you're having conversations, you need to be knock. Knock. N-O-Q. Neutral, objective, and asking questions. Okay? Fundamentally, every single person has a different perception of reality. I know, sounds a little crazy, but it's true. Our perception of reality is completely based on our belief systems, our past experiences, and our interpretation of the event. That's why so many people have different perspectives of the exact same thing. That's why so many people react to the exact same situation in different ways. Because we all live in a slightly different reality. We all have a slightly different sense of reality, again, based on our past experiences, beliefs, and perceptions. Understanding that is fundamental to having open, good, productive conversations with others. Because when you understand that people have a different perspective than you, it becomes so much easier to anticipate that. So you're not thrown off when someone has a different perspective. You're not thrown off when they have a different idea than you would. It becomes that much easier to remain neutral, objective, and ask questions. Okay? So fundamentally, anticipate that others will have a different opinion and a different perspective than you do. And that is okay. That is a good thing, because once you anticipate it, it won't throw you off and you can handle the conversation that much better. Now, it is so important to remain neutral and objective throughout the conversation, but especially right at the beginning. The way that you respond to a conversation and the way that you handle it right at the beginning determines how the rest of it goes. Because going back to the idea of being heard versus being held, if you jump in with a solution and the person just wanted to vent, there's already that mismatch there. And now they're irked, now they're angry, now they're frustrated that you're not hearing them, even though you're trying to be helpful. Okay? So a conversation is starting. Always do your best to remain neutral and objective in the moment, despite your opinions, despite if you think you have the solution. Okay? Hold off on that at first and just take the time to listen to what the other person is saying. Now, when I say that, many people think taking the time means taking a long time, like having a 20 or 30-minute conversation. It doesn't have to be. It could be 30 seconds. It can be 1 to 2 minutes. But it's taking that initial moment to let the other person speak without interrupting, without interjecting, without thinking that you know what they're going to say or where the conversation is going. It's giving them the grace and the respect to get their thoughts out fully in the beginning and holding that space for them to just let them speak. Doing that alone from a neutral and objective place without judgment or criticism will give you so much insight into what they would like from the conversation and really where their mind is at. Just like it's important to react right in the beginning, it's also important to maintain that neutrality and objectivity throughout the conversation. Because the way that the conversation works, it's a two-way street. It's back and forth. If one person reacts in a way that is not what the other person wanted, the conversation starts to derail, could spiral out of control pretty quickly. So it's important to understand that being neutral and objective throughout the entire conversation will help maintain the balance of the conversation. But more importantly, it becomes easier to catch when a conversation is derailing. Now, a bad reaction or an unexpected reaction could be something that you say, but it could also be your nonverbals, the way that your body language changes or the facial expression that you make. So imagine someone is talking to you about a mistake that they made, and you make a face of either like judgment or criticism or shock, whatever the case, your facial expression conveys so much information to them. Okay, so when you're learning to be neutral and objective, it is important to also incorporate that into your nonverbal cues and your facial expressions. Now, I'm not saying you have to be stoic the entire time and just sit there like this. But you do have to be mindful of learning to hide your reactions a little bit, just a little bit, so that if it is coming from a place of shock or judgment or criticism, that's not coming through to the other individual, so that you're still able to ask them questions and get their perspective and help them feel heard without showing that you disagree or you think it's silly or anything else. For example, imagine your team member came to you and wanted to talk about a mistake that they made on a project. What if your initial reaction is to get triggered and get angry and get frustrated and tell them what to do instead? How effective do you think that conversation will be? Do you think your team member will walk away feeling good and feeling that like they're ready and they know how to fix the mistake? Perhaps. but more likely, they're not going to feel very good. They're going to feel judged for what they did. Now, caveat, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I am saying that to be a good, effective leader, understand that mistakes will happen, understand that things won't always go correctly, and knowing how to handle that well in the moment and guide the person through it, again, neutrally and objectively, will help in the long run and will help you develop that trust and connection with your team. Okay? So imagine you blow up and you get angry. That conversation won't go very well. Versus imagine you are able to be calm and neutral. You ask questions about what happened. You help them get to a solution. And they walk away feeling confident in your leadership skills. They walk away confident in themselves that they're able to handle and find a resolution accordingly. And more importantly, next time a mistake happens, they feel comfortable coming to you for help and solutions. Now, that's crucial in business. Because when people don't feel able to speak about mistakes, those mistakes can cost you even more. Building on the idea of being NOC, being neutral, objective, and asking questions, I want you to start thinking of yourself as a world-class interviewer. Okay? Think about the best interviewers that you are a fan of. What do they have in common? Well, number one, they ask really good questions. Number two, they come from a place of non-judgment. And number three, they respect the other person's perspective. They treat their guests like VIPs that they genuinely want to talk to, that they genuinely want to know more about, whose opinion that they value, even if they disagree. Even if they disagree, they still do a good job of keeping that disagreement neutral and diplomatic, and sharing their side, sharing their opinion in a way that's mutually respectful. Okay? So start thinking of yourself as a world-class interviewer and start approaching your conversations in the same way. So number one, ask questions, especially in the beginning of the conversation. Asking open-ended questions. So the who, the what, the where, the how. I'm holding on the why. That is a fantastic way to open the conversation, to help the individual get their point across and feel heard, and to really get a deeper sense of where their thoughts are at before you jump in with either the solution, the process, the relations, etc. Okay? So the reason I hold off on the why, you definitely want to ask the what, the how, the where questions, but the why you have to be a little bit careful with, because it's a slippery slope that can lead to judgment if asked incorrectly. So when asking why, it is okay to ask why they think something. It is okay to ask why something happened, but it's all about the phrasing. Okay? For example, let's say they did something that led to a mistake, and you say, why did you do that? Why did you do that? Comes across as very judgmental, and comes across as very like, ooh, you're in trouble. Versus, oh, what was the thought process behind this? Right? It's an indirect way of asking, why did you do this? But what was your thought process behind this is much subtler and much easier to respond to than, why did you do this? Right? So important to ask those open-ended questions, but still in a way as a world-class interviewer would, that is respectful and open, and just be neutral and listen to their response. Don't jump in, don't interject, don't think you know what they're going to say. Give them the time and the space to answer appropriately. As you're asking open-ended questions, treat the conversation like that is the only thing on your plate right now. So going back to the idea of creating the mental and emotional space, what often happens when we're having conversations is we don't want to be fully in the conversation because we're thinking about something else, something that's coming up, something that just happened, something that we have to do. And that detracts from the conversation itself. So learning to be mindful of the conversation that you're in, and again, it doesn't mean every conversation has to be an hour long. But if you're going to spend 5 minutes speaking to someone, give them your full 5 minutes. Okay? Treat them like a VIP guest when you are that world-class interviewer, and give them your time, your focus, and your presence. That alone will start to make a giant difference in the nature of your conversations. Okay, so as you're asking open-ended questions, as you're giving them your full time and attention, also just be mindful that their perspective, their opinions, their point of view will differ from yours, and that is okay. Give them that leeway and that freedom to have a different perspective. Don't judge it, don't interject, don't tell them why they're wrong. Let them explain their perspective first. So anytime you're having a conversation, go into it with the mindset of being neutral, objective, and asking questions so that you understand their sense of reality. And once you have that understanding of their perception, it becomes so much easier to share yours and to guide the conversation to where you'd like it to be, because you took the time to have that fundamental understanding of their perspective, their opinion, their take on the situation first. Okay? So as you're working through identifying your default responses to conversations, as you're working through identifying any triggers that you have, as you're working through your triggers, as you're working through not jumping to a default type of conversation, as you're working through entering a conversation, being neutral, objective, and asking open-ended questions, as you develop that understanding that other people will have a different perspective than you, your job as you enter the conversation is really to understand before you respond. Okay? Your job is to understand before you respond. Without that fundamental understanding of the situation, their perspective, their opinion, you are unintentionally sabotaging the conversation if you jump right in. Okay? So fundamentally, as you're doing the inner work, just understand that before you respond, take an extra moment to make sure you fully understand their opinion, their perspective, their point of view. Okay? This is foundational to doing the inner work, to holding that mental and emotional space for the other person. Now, it may seem a little bit different. It may seem a little bit out there. It may seem a little bit stupid even, but it works. And it is extremely effective. And once you take the time to work through on your inner game and work through these inner strategies first, you will start to see that the way that you enter conversations completely shifts. The way that you show up in conversations will change for the better. And as a leader, your team members and your colleagues will notice. That alone is worth it. Now, it is so important that you take that extra moment. And again, it could just be a minute or two. It could be one or two additional questions to make sure you understand the perspective first. Because once you have that fundamental understanding of their opinion, their perspective, now you have an understanding of how to approach the conversation in a way that is mutually beneficial. Because once you have taken the time to really ask those questions and let them speak, well, now you know what their goal is. Now you have a much better understanding of where they're coming from, and you can meet them there accordingly. And conversations just go so much better when that fundamental mutual respect and understanding comes into play. Okay? So this was part one, the inner work. Now let's get into part two, the strategies of actually having the conversations. Okay, part two, how to approach conversations correctly. So again, the first thing you want to do when a conversation is starting is understand whether the person wants to be helped or heard. Giving them time to, again, even if it's just a minute or two, to speak their mind fully, that alone will give you a much better sense of where they are and what they likely need from you. So you've let them speak. You're starting to get a sense of whether you think they want to be helped or heard. And now you're asking follow-up, open-ended questions from a place of neutrality and objectivity so that you get that fundamental understanding of what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and why, without judgment. So as they are speaking to you, as they are telling you things, you're not going to jump in with your thoughts quite yet. First, what you're going to do is reflect what you're hearing back to them. Now, what do I mean by this? Reflecting back to them is really taking the main points that they have said, paraphrasing it, and saying it back to them. Now, paraphrase, don't parrot. When you take the exact same words that they said and you pair it back to them, it's a very superficial way of having conversations. But when you take the main points of what you've heard, you paraphrase it back to them, you say it in your own words, what this does is, number one, it shows them that you were listening. So if they entered the conversation wanting to be heard, you just check that box. You listened, you heard. Number two, it gives them a sense of what your main takeaways from the conversation so far were. If there is any miscommunication, if there's any misinterpretation, if you've picked up on the wrong things, that's the perfect opportunity for them to let you know. This is important because it helps reduce miscommunication. And number three, if they add anything, if they change anything, if they repeat anything, now that is amazing information for you, because it again gives you so much context into what they're thinking and what's important to them. Now, in a conversation, it is so crucial that you learn to identify what is important to the other person, what their objective for the conversation is, because then you can handle it effectively. Okay? So the conversation has started, you've listened, you've asked a few open-ended questions, and now you are paraphrasing back to them what the main points were. They have the freedom to agree with you, feel heard, feel validated, or they may correct you. And that is good because it shows that the conversation is working and it gives you more context into their thinking. Once you have paraphrased, well, now you get into validating the other person. Validating means acknowledging that what happened to them, that what they are saying, that what they are feeling is true for them. This doesn't mean acceptance or approval. It doesn't mean you would do the same thing. So even if you disagree with their approach, even if you disagree with what they did, validation really just means you are acknowledging that what they experience is true for them. And this is important because, once again, everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different way of seeing things and a different way of reacting to things. So we cannot enforce our way onto others. It just won't work. And that's why validation is so important. So this may look like the team member comes to you, they were struggling with a project, and they made a mistake. Validating them may look something like, I understand that this has been frustrating for you so far. Or, I understand that it may have been hard to bring this up. Or, I understand that you likely didn't want to make a mistake, but it still happened, so let's work through it. Right? It's just acknowledging the reality of what they are experiencing. And that is fundamental to do in a conversation because it really builds that rapport. It makes them show that you are listening. And more importantly, it makes them feel safe and like they're in a safe space to continue the conversation with you. Okay? So we're having the conversation. We're remaining neutral. We are letting them speak. We're asking a few follow-up questions. Then we are paraphrasing what we have heard. And then we are validating the truth of their experience. Okay? That is the process we're following so far. Now, as you're having the conversation, one thing I'd like to mention is please don't be Dr. Google. Please don't be Dr. Google. What happens when you are typing into Google? Google starts making suggestions and recommendations based on what it thinks you're going to say. Don't do that to others. Give them the respect and the time and the space to articulate their thoughts. Okay? Don't make suggestions. Don't jump in. Do not assume that you know where they are going with their thought process, because in reality, you may not. And jumping in and telling them where you think their thought process is going could throw them off, and they may feel obligated or obliged to continue with what you suggested, especially if you are a leader and, in a hierarchy above them. And that just sways the nature of the conversation, and it actually makes them feel less heard and less validated. Because rather than giving them the opportunity to speak their mind, rather than giving them the respect of completing their thought, you interrupted and cut them off and think that, you're smarter and you know better. Okay? So if that is something that you find yourself doing, call yourself out on being Dr. Google and work on no longer doing that to others. The only caveat that I can think of is if someone appears to be really struggling to articulate themselves, give them a moment to process their thoughts. Give them 2, 3, 4 seconds of silence. If they are really struggling, make a recommendation that is 1 or 2 words at the most. That could be a kind way of giving them a little bit of support and showing them that you are still in the conversation and you are still doing your best to understand them. But the trick there is to give them that suggestion and then let them see how it feels. Let them either take it and run with it or not and let them process, okay? Rather than giving the suggestion and then thinking you took over the conversation and leading it, okay? Give them the respect of the time and the space to process their thoughts fully. Now, I know sometimes that is hard. It's context and time dependent, but this is a skill that you will get better at the more that you practice and the more that you do it, okay? So for example, if you know that someone wants to have a conversation with you, but you only have 5 minutes or you only have 15 minutes, whatever, you can even say that at the beginning of the conversation. You can contextualize it and let them know, hey, I'd love to chat with you, but I only have 5 minutes. Is that all right with you? If they say yes, fantastic. You enter the conversation. When the 5 minutes is up, you let them know, hey, I'm so sorry, I have to run. Can we pick this up later? Or you get good at wrapping up the conversation and getting through all the steps within that 5 minutes, okay? Both are possible, both are acceptable, but it will take time and practice until you develop the skill and the ability to gauge. Is it time to wrap up and move through this quickly within the 5 minutes? Or is this a longer, deeper conversation that we can start, put a pin in, and return to later? Okay, so as you're having the conversation, as you're entering the conversation, a very important point to keep in mind is that whatever intention they start the conversation with and whatever default you are at, usually they don't match. So always meet the person where they are first before you get them to where you are and you'd like to be. Now, this goes back to, again, making that inner space, to hold the space for them to have that conversation, to be neutral, objective, ask questions, to make sure that you're getting their point of view. And really, that is fundamental to understanding where they are coming from so that you can get at their level, help them feel seen, help them feel heard, help them feel validated. Because once you have done that, now it becomes so much easier to get them to your level, okay? So imagine a team member comes to you. They are struggling with a project and they want to work through some solutions. The default response in your mind might be to give them the solution, to just tell them what to do and get on with it within 2 minutes. What you'll want to do instead is meet them where they are. Give them, even if it's just a few minutes, give them that time to talk, to process their feelings and process their thoughts fully. Ask them questions about why they are thinking this way. Ask them questions about what the different solutions that they're thinking of are, right? Ask them why they're preferring one over the other, right? So you're asking a few questions, you're paraphrasing and letting them know, okay, it sounds like this is what's going on and this is what you're thinking of. Validate their experience, right? This might be frustrating, this might be time crunch, whatever it is for them, just validate it. Once you have done all that, now they are in a place where they feel seen, they feel heard, they feel validated. They have gotten what they need out of the conversation for you to then say, hey, would you be open to hearing my advice? Would you be open to working through the solutions together? Would you like to hear my thoughts on this? And that is like reaching out and extending your hand, having them take it and getting them to where you want to go and where you were originally thinking. But it takes meeting them where they are and getting them through that journey to get the conversation to end effectively. Because if they come to you and you just say, hey, this is what you should do, go on, sure, that can work and that can be effective. But in the long run, right, when you're working with your team in the long run, that is not building trust and connection and rapport, and that is not teaching them the skills to process and get to where they need to be on their own. So even if you take 5 minutes to hear their thought process, to hear the options that they're working through, and to then say, hey, you're just what you're thinking is working, you're working through the thought process well, Or, hey, here are the flaws that I'm addressing in your thought process, right? Taking that additional step is an amazing and a beautiful teaching moment and a teaching opportunity that will have positive repercussions moving forward. Okay? So they feel heard, they feel validated, and now you're kindly asking them, again, being respectful throughout, if they are open to sharing your solution, your thoughts, etc. And now you're guiding them to where you want the conversation to go. But because they feel heard and validated, they are going to follow you. Versus if you were to just jump in with your solutions, they don't feel heard, they don't feel guided, they may not be as willing to implement your solutions because that trust and rapport wasn't built. Okay? So when you listen to them first, they are more likely to listen to you. That's why it is so important to do that inner work and to use these strategies to give them the time and space and respect to work through their part of the conversation first. Because once they were listened to, once they feel heard, they are more likely to listen to you in return. Okay, let's get into part 3, the nuance. Okay, part 3, the nuance of language and conversations. So by now, you're getting very good at listening to what is being said to you. You're hearing the words, you're hearing the meaning, you understand what is being said. But so much of the context, so much of the information, so much happens subconsciously and isn't said. It's what is said between the lines. It is our body language, our facial expressions, and the nuance of our word choice. Okay? So, part 3, in the nuance, the first thing that I'd like you to start doing is paying attention to the connotation of the words that the people are using when they speak to you. Are they using words like adjectives and nouns that have a positive connotation, a negative connotation, maybe neutral, or is it a forced, aka fake neutral? Okay? This is crucial because it gives you so much information and context to what they are actually thinking and feeling. So if you're meeting with a team member and you're asking them to check in, just give you progress and updates on a project, and they are forcing themselves to say everything's going fine and they're faking this neutrality. But you start to hear words here and there of frustration, overwhelm, setbacks, any sort of negative connotation. Well, now, because you're training yourself to pick up on that, now you're reading between the lines and you understand that beneath the surface, there's something that's not going well. And that's where you can ask the questions and dive into it deeper. Okay? So in addition to listening to the positive or negative connotation of words, start listening for repetition. Are any words being repeated? For example, if someone mentions several times that something was frustrating, they were frustrated by, this thing happened, then they were frustrated, right? Repetition is key because that means that thing is really standing out to them. And again, a lot of this happens on a subconscious level, but it is very important that you learn to identify it. Because when you are in a place where you're identifying, hey, you've said this multiple times, what I'm hearing is you may be very frustrated by this project. Now you can get into it and handle it appropriately rather than letting it escalate. Okay? So as you're having the conversation, once you get familiar and comfortable working through the journey of the conversation, now you're looking for the nuance. What's the connotation of the words that they're using? What words are they repeating? What's the connotation of the words that they're using? What words, if any, are they repeating? And is there any disconnect between their words and their emotions? Okay? So again, going back to the idea of the fake neutrality. Are they using words that have one connotation, but they're trying to say it in a way that's the opposite? So for example, are they trying to say that everything's fine, but that subtlety of this isn't going well is coming through? That's important to pick up on. Are they saying that this is very frustrating, but they're talking about it in an optimistic way and they seem to have a handle on it? That's important to pick up on because again, then you reflect back and you validate that, hey, this sounds like it's perhaps a frustrating experience, but you seem to be handling it well. That opens the door for them to then follow up, be seen, be heard, be validated, and say, hey, actually, yes, it has been, but here's what I'm doing about it, right? Understanding all of this helps you hear what is being said, understand what isn't being said, and create that safe space for them. Now, in addition to starting to be mindful of the nuance of the language of the other person, you now have to be mindful of the nuance of your language. What words are you using? Are the words that you're using with a positive or a negative connotation, right? Are you telling someone that perhaps they're doing well, but you're using more negative words, right? This is something to keep in mind because, again, so much of what we say and what we pick up on is subconscious, but it matters because it creates that feeling within us when we walk away from a conversation, either feeling good about it, feeling misheard, misunderstood, or feeling like, oh, that didn't go well, right? So you want to equip yourself with the skills and the tools so that as many conversations as possible end with both of you feeling good about it. I'm not saying that negative things won't come up, but it's the skill to be able to handle those negative things effectively so that both of you feel good about the solution moving forward. Okay? So start being mindful of the nuance of the word choice that you're hearing, as well as the nuance of the word choice that you are saying to the other person, because just like you are picking up on theirs, they are picking up on yours. Now, as you're being mindful of the word choice, part 2, also be mindful of the tone, body language, and facial expressions. So your tone is the way that you sound. Do you sound calm? Do you sound bored and monotone? Do you sound angry? Right? That's the tone that you speak with. Going back to being neutral and objective, as much as possible, use that in your tone as well. Even if you disagree, it's important to learn how to have a neutral tone, just like an interviewer would, so that you're not giving a sense of your emotions, especially if it's negative, frustrated, disagreeing, criticizing, etc., to the other person through your tone, right? So imagine your team member comes to you, they're struggling with a project, it's not going well, they made a mistake, and you say, why would you do that, right? Whoa, what does that tone show? That I'm frustrated, angry, and I'm criticizing and judging you. What does my word say? This is your fault. Why would you do that? It's your fault. In my mind, it's your fault, right? All of this combined matters and completely shapes how the conversation's going at every point, okay? Instead, learning to be mindful of your tone and say, oh, this mistake happened. Oh, I understand. Could you explain to me why this was done this way? Or could you explain your thought process behind why this occurred? Right? Anything like that is a little bit more neutral, but so much more effective. In addition to tone, start being mindful of the body language and the facial expressions of the other person. The body language that we use has so much information, provides so much context for how someone is actually feeling. So, number 1, looking at their body language and their facial expressions in the moment. Does it match what they are saying? If they're having a problem, if they're using words that are very negative, perhaps they're frustrated, their body language will likely reflect that as well. Well, now you're getting the whole picture. Here's this problem, here's what they're struggling with, it's really impacting them. Now I'm equipped with the right information to address it accordingly, right? But that's where being mindful of facial expressions and body language matters when what they're saying isn't aligning to what you're seeing. So someone may be saying, hey, your team member comes to you and they say, hey, this is the project, I'm working on it, it's going well, but you see that they're starting to slouch, or their face looks worried or nervous, right? Or they're really leaning back and crossing their arms and not engaged with their verbals. That is important information for you to know, because that gives you so much context as to how they actually feel about the situation. And again, that's important because number 1, if it matches, you're getting the whole picture. But if it doesn't match, if there's a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're showing you, well, that is important for you to unpack, because that's where you can start to reflect it. Like, hey, the project, I understand the project seems to be going well, but are you experiencing any difficulties with it? Or Are you frustrated by the experience or something? An open-ended question that they then get to provide more information and feel seen and heard and validated. Okay? All of this combined, the layers on top of each other, this is what really sets you apart as a leader that does effective, active listening. Okay? So same like word choice though, as you're being mindful of theirs, you also need to learn to be mindful of yours. So your team member comes to you, they're saying something, you may disagree or you may be frustrated, and it's learning to keep your face neutral and your body language neutral so that you're not fidgeting out of discomfort, so that you're not grimacing and showing them that you're mad or frustrated or disagree, so that you're not physically leaning back from them because you don't want to have the conversation, or you're upset or you're frustrated and you want to get as far away from them as you can. Facial expressions, body language matter because, again, just like they are hearing what you are saying, just like you are hearing what they're saying, it's going both ways. It's a two-way street. Now, just like everything that we've covered so far, all of these things, so doing the inner work, doing the strategies to get the conversation through the journey, being mindful of the nuance, the details, the nonverbal cues, all of this matters in one-on-one conversations, whether they are in person or virtually. The only caveat that I'd really like to talk about is that virtual settings need a little bit more from you, okay? So in person, we have so much context because we're right there with the other person. In a virtual setting, something like a Zoom, the only thing that people are seeing is this. And so this really matters because 100% of the nonverbal information they're getting is from like 20% of your body. So your facial expressions become that much more important, and your posture and body language becomes that much more important because it's all they see in a virtual setting. Okay? So you still use the same strategies. You still come at it neutrally, ask lots of questions, reflect, validate, right? Meet them where they are, but you just have to be a lot more mindful of how you appear on the screen to them. So especially on our devices, it can become very easy to get distracted, right? To want to browse on the web, to answer a quick email, to pull up something, but you can tell. So not only are your eyes not focused on them, but just your face, your body, everything starts to give away that you're not focused. So going back to doing the inner work, treating them like a VIP, and you're the world-class interviewer, same thing, but a little bit more in a virtual context, so that you are really present and really mindful and really engaged in the conversation, and they get that across from you. Okay? Sometimes in a virtual setting, what you'll find is there may be a little bit of tech glitches. Someone may lag, someone may freeze, you may talk over each other. If that happens, it is okay. It happens. Go with it. However, if you talk over each other, always let the other person go first. Let them speak their mind and get their thoughts out, because again, you are the one holding the safe space for them as the leader. Caveat there is that they may feel obligated to talk quickly or to shorten their point and not really get into what they wanted to say, out of respect for you to have your turn because you talked over each other. So if you find that they're sort of going through it quickly or running through their point, invite them to expand on their point, right? You could say, oh, I was just going to say this thing quickly, but I really want to hear more about this. And give them the freedom and the grace to really expand on their point of view, okay? If there is a tech glitch, I've had this happen as well, where someone is in the middle of telling me something important and it cuts out, it freezes, it lags. That's okay. Just be mindful and respectful and let them know, hey, I'm so sorry. You know, the computer froze or the internet lagged at this point, and then just reflect and say, hey, here's what I understand so far. What did I miss? Or could you fill in the details of what I missed? Could you expand on this more? So here's what I heard. Could you please continue with this point? Okay? It is okay. It happens. Just be respectful and mindful about it, and they'll appreciate that from you. Now, the very last thing that I'd like to get into is the differences between one-on-one conversations and active listening in a group setting. So one-on-one conversations are a little bit easier because it's just you and one other person. You're building that connection, you're building that rapport, you're listening to them directly. When you are the leader and you have a group in front of you, it is still your job to use those strategies and to control the conversation of the group. So when you're in a group setting and one person starts talking, completely okay to give your focus and attention to that one person to make them feel heard and validated, but not the entire time. You still want to make sure that you're acknowledging the rest of the group and having the opportunity for them to answer or to add anything from their perspective once this person's done talking. So this may look like body language, right? Being open to the entire group and looking at each member of the group periodically. So if this individual is talking to me and I'm a group of 5 other people, I will give them 80%, 90% of my attention, but still make it a point to show to the rest of the group that they are involved and engaged so that they don't mentally check out if they think I'm just having a one-on-one, okay? When someone has finished talking, the same strategies would apply. Ask them open-ended questions. Ask the group open-ended questions so that everyone has the capacity to contribute. Reflect the main points. Validate any feelings that need to be validated. Validate the experiences of different group members if they differ. That's totally fine because, again, just like you and one person have different perspectives, in a group of 5, in a group of 10, in a group of 20, there's that many different perspectives. So totally fine to validate each of the different perspectives. What that will do is it will actually create a sense of trust and mutual respect between the group members as well. Because rather than it being black or white, right or wrong, well, now there's an understanding that, hey, if someone has a different perspective, if someone's coming at it from a different angle, that is respected within the group. That is fine. We can work through that and we can get to the best possible solution and outcome and not be shut down because it's a slightly different perspective. Okay? It's a very important distinction to help create psychological safety within your team. However, as the leader, it is important to be sure that one single person is not taking up too much attention if they're the type of person that constantly speaks. So in a group, naturally, there are some people who tend to speak more than others. So it is your job to ask open-ended questions, to encourage open dialogue and participation, and not let one person dictate the nature of the conversation because that's their personality. Right? So that may look like intentionally asking for different opinions. That may look like asking other people specifically whether they have something to contribute, although I don't always recommend putting people on the spot. Or that may look like respectfully shutting someone down and letting them know, hey, let's put a pin in this for now. I think we've covered this in enough depth, and I would like to talk about this for a minute, right? If someone's been talking for too long and they're hogging the mic, so to say, it's your job as the leader to know how to shut that down respectfully and kindly, but still give them space to be able to contribute in other ways if they need to, okay? Now, in a group setting, in team dynamics, as the leader, it is actually important that when you're starting a conversation or when a conversation is happening between the team, you stay neutral and objective and ask questions for as long as possible without sharing your point and perspective. Now, here's why. This may seem counterintuitive at first, but there is ample research to suggest that in a team setting, when the team knows that their leader has a specific opinion or a specific expectation, they are way less likely to speak out against it. So if something's not going well, if they have a different point of view, if they'd like to bring up a different perspective, they are less likely to do it if they know that you as the leader have a specific perspective already in place. Okay? So essentially, you're swaying the judgment of everyone else by sharing your point of view first. Okay? So again, context dependent, you may need to be mindful of this and play around with it. But if you can, if you're bringing up something to the group, bring it up as an open-ended question from a place of neutrality so that you can get a better sense of everyone's opinions and perspectives before you then guide them with yours. Okay? So again, going back to being an interviewer, understand before you respond. Make it a safe space for them to contribute their opinions and perceptions before you guide them with yours. Because hey, you never know. having that open-mindedness may lead to better outcomes than what you had originally thought. It's possible, but it's only possible when you create that safe space first. Now, when it comes to one-on-ones, it is important to use that moment of silence or that pause to give them the space to process their thoughts and to finish their sentence without interrupting, right? So when you're having that one-on-one conversation, when someone finishes speaking, perfectly acceptable to wait 1, 2, 3 seconds to ensure that they're finished speaking, showing them that you're respecting their time before you jump in with your opinion. The same thing goes in a group setting. When someone is speaking, don't interrupt as much as you can. I know it is very tempting for most of us, but when they're done speaking, give it a moment, give it a beat. Ensure that they have the time to finish. And going back to the idea of sometimes people are processing and they're sort of at a loss for words, give them a moment. Create a safe space within the team dynamic where people feel like they are able to process and articulate themselves in a way that will be respected and handled appropriately, and not in a way where someone will just interject, and take over. As the leader, you are setting the team culture. You are setting the expectations. So the more that you are able to create this respectful, safe space for others, the more they'll create it within each other, between themselves as well. So when someone finishes speaking, give them a moment, let them process before you either respond, ask a question, or get other team members involved. Sometimes you may ask a question and no one would answer, right? Sometimes when people are unsure, they're unwilling, they don't want to be the first one to speak. If that happens, give it a few seconds of silence. If no one is volunteering to speak, rephrase your question. Ask the question again in a different way, paraphrase it, and then invite them to respond. So rather than asking a question that could be posed as a hypothetical or as a rhetorical question, paraphrase it and then openly ask, what are your thoughts? Who would like to share their thoughts? Can you think of any differing perspectives? Are you seeing any flaws in the arguments? Have we overlooked anything? Asking for different perspectives, different opinions, and even playing devil's advocate is extremely effective, because anyone who is hesitant to speak their mind or to share their experience, well, now they're being invited to share their perspective, and they're much more likely to do so. And you'll find over time that this actually helps the nature of the conversations be a lot more dynamic, engaging, and get you to new places, rather than sharing your opinion, having everyone agree, and sort of ending it there. Okay. So one-on-one conversations, we've talked about nonverbal cues. Also important to be mindful of nonverbal cues in a group setting. Important to be mindful of your nonverbal cues because, again, as the leader, they're looking for you for guidance. And any context, any information that you're providing with your nonverbal cues also lets them know how you're really feeling, even if it is subconsciously. So if you are giving nonverbal cues that you're not engaged, you're tired, you're thinking about something else, you disagree, your team will pick up on that and they'll start to mimic that as well. Okay, so learning to be mindful of your nonverbal cues, whether that's your posture and your facial expressions, how you're holding yourself, how you're reacting. Okay, but also important to be mindful of your team's nonverbal cues. So it starts to get a little bit tricky the more individuals that there are, but you really want to get good at looking at two things: patterns and changes. Okay, so if you're saying something and you notice multiple people change their nonverbal cues or make a facial expression and they all seem to be in disagreement, well, that's a pattern. Now you're noticing that, hey, perhaps there's disagreement, perhaps there's dissent, perhaps we need to address this further. That is all important information for you to have. Because again, it's not only what is said, it's what is not being said that also matters. Okay, so you're looking for patterns of multiple people having similar nonverbal cues or facial expressions, and you're looking for changes. So let's say you're talking about a potential solution to a project. Everyone seems to be on board. And then you propose the idea and multiple people sort of shift, they fidget, they change the posture, they change the facial expression in that moment to what you said. That's an amazing indication for you that they may not be on board with what you just proposed. right? They may not verbally say it to you, but you can tell by their body language and their facial expressions that this isn't something that they're sold on. And again, that is extremely important information for you because then you're able to address it appropriately and accordingly. Okay? So nonverbal cues is always a two-way street. You are projecting your nonverbals and you are reading their nonverbals as well. Okay? So final thing, as you wrap up any sort of group conversation, team meeting, etc., always summarize. The majority of what we hear and the majority of what is said is quickly forgotten. So people who attend a meeting typically forget up to 80% of it within like 24 hours. We forget a lot. So as the leader, it is your job to finish the meeting with a summary. These are the main points that you want everyone to walk away knowing. So not only are you repeating it, and repetition is key for memory, but you are emphasizing the key takeaways that you want them to have. This is also a really great time to assign things and emphasize who is doing what by when. How many times have you left a team meeting and you thought everyone was on the same page, but the work doesn't get done? And Bob thought that George would do it, and George thought that you would do it, and you thought that Bob would do it, and no one knows what's going on, but everyone knows it needs to be done, right? Simple way to prevent that miscommunication is to summarize the main points and then summarize the tasks. Who is doing what by when? Okay? The more that you do it, it may feel a little bit uncomfortable at first. The more that you do it, the more it becomes the norm. Once it becomes the norm, it's the norm. It's the expectation. People are reacting to it because they anticipate that that's what will happen. They become okay with being assigned work by a certain time because that's the expectation that you have set consistently. Okay? So, to recap, to become a better active listener, you really have to start by doing the inner work to identify where you are mentally and emotionally so that you can start to hold space for others to be present and attentive in the conversation with them. Once you're in the conversation, now you are being you're being neutral, objective, and asking questions. You're understanding that they're coming from a point of view that's different than your own. You're asking them questions so that you get that really deep understanding of where they're coming from. You are asking questions to get that good sense. You are reflecting what you hear back to them to show them that you are listening, to show them that they are heard, to prevent any miscommunication. You're validating their feelings. And then you're meeting them where they are so that you can get them to where you want to be. You are asking questions and asking permission to go from where they are to where you'd like to go. And that could be through a simple question such as, would you be open to hearing my advice on this? As you're having the conversation, you are being mindful of the words that they're using and the words that you're using. You're being mindful of the nonverbal cues and the facial expressions that you are giving and that you are receiving. And you are being mindful of what is being said and said between the lines so that you understand the whole picture, so that you understand where they're coming from, what they are experiencing, what they expect of you, and then handling it appropriately. And when you go through this conversational journey, you'll find that you are much better at listening. People feel so much better after talking to you because they feel heard and validated. You're getting to more solutions more effectively. And overall, conversations will just start to become easier. But it all starts by doing that inner work and practicing the strategies because it will take a little bit of time, especially if this is something that's new to you. So keep at it. Please reach out to me if you have any questions about anything we've talked about in this training. And if you need additional support, again, just reach out to me. You can always email me at info@christina80.com or send me a DM on LinkedIn or Instagram or on YouTube. Okay? I'm here to support you. Let me know if you have any questions whatsoever. And I'd love to hear about how this goes and what your biggest breakthroughs were. Take care.